Rebecca Martinez had always been different from her peers at Whitfield Academy. While other students complained about the strict military-style discipline, she thrived under the structure. Her father, Colonel James Martinez, had instilled in her a deep respect for order and honor from a young age. The Academy's motto, "Strength through Unity," was embroidered on every uniform, every banner, and burned into every student's memory. Rebecca wore her academy crest with pride, never imagining that one day it would save her life. The trouble began during her senior year when Commander Patricia Hawthorne took over as the Academy's new director. Hawthorne was a former Navy officer who had been discharged under questionable circumstances, though the official records were sealed. She brought with her a new philosophy that clashed with everything Whitfield Academy had stood for. Where previous directors had emphasized character building and mutual respect, Hawthorne ruled through fear and intimidation. She seemed to take particular pleasure in targeting students whose parents held high-ranking military positions, as if she had something to prove. Rebecca first caught Hawthorne's attention during a routine inspection. While other students scrambled to meet the impossibly high standards, Rebecca's quarters were always immaculate. Her uniform was pressed to perfection, her boots gleamed, and her bearing was that of a natural leader. Instead of praise, this excellence seemed to irritate Hawthorne. "Miss Martinez," she would say with a sneer, "thinks she's better than everyone else because of her daddy's rank." The other students began to whisper, some jealous of Rebecca's confidence, others afraid to associate with someone who had become the commander's target. The harassment escalated when Rebecca was elected student body president by an overwhelming margin. Hawthorne couldn't hide her displeasure during the announcement ceremony. "Leadership isn't about popularity," she said coldly, staring directly at Rebecca. "It's about making hard choices and accepting consequences." The words felt like a threat, and Rebecca's instincts told her to be careful. She had grown up around military personnel and could recognize the signs of someone who had lost their way, someone who had let bitterness consume their sense of duty. As weeks passed, Hawthorne's behavior became increasingly erratic. She would call Rebecca to her office for minor infractions that other students routinely committed without consequence. She criticized Rebecca's leadership style, claiming she was too soft on her peers. When Rebecca organized a charity drive for local veterans, Hawthorne shut it down, claiming it was politically motivated. The other students watched in stunned silence, as their respected leader was systematically undermined by someone who seemed to enjoy wielding power for its own sake. The breaking point came during a surprise dormitory raid. Hawthorne claimed to have received an anonymous tip about contraband in Rebecca's room. As she tore through Rebecca's belongings, she discovered a letter from Rebecca's father, congratulating her on her acceptance to the Air Force Academy. Hawthorne's face twisted with rage as she read the letter aloud to the assembled students. "So the princess thinks she's going to follow in Daddy's footsteps," she sneered. "We'll see about that." The humiliation was complete, but Rebecca maintained her composure, knowing that any reaction would only make things worse. That night, Rebecca made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't let Hawthorne's abuse continue unchecked, not just for her own sake, but for the sake of every student who came after her. She began documenting every interaction, every unfair punishment, every abuse of power. She was going to expose Commander Hawthorne, but she would do it the right way, through proper channels, with evidence that couldn't be disputed. What she didn't know was that her actions would soon put her in mortal danger. The next morning brought news that would shake the academy to its core. During the night, someone had broken into Hawthorne's office and stolen classified files. The base went into immediate lockdown, and suspicion fell on Rebecca due to her recent conflicts with the commander. Despite her protests of innocence, she was placed under house arrest pending a full investigation. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was being punished for a crime she didn't commit while preparing to expose the real criminal behavior happening right under everyone's noses. As the investigation dragged on, Rebecca's situation became increasingly precarious. Hawthorne seemed determined to pin the theft on her, regardless of the evidence. The commander had allies in the administration who were willing to look the other way, and Rebecca began to realize that her documented evidence might never see the light of day. She was fighting a system that was designed to protect itself, and she was losing. The weight of injustice pressed down on her like a physical force, but she refused to break. 3 weeks into the investigation, Rebecca made a desperate decision. She would escape the academy grounds and take her evidence directly to the proper authorities. It was a dangerous gamble that could result in additional charges, but she saw no other choice. Using her knowledge of the Academy's security protocols, she planned her escape for the early morning hours when the guard rotation would be at its weakest. She had no idea that her actions would trigger a chain of events that would put her directly in the crosshairs of the most advanced fighter jets in the world. The escape itself went smoothly at first. Rebecca had always been athletic, and her military training served her well as she navigated the academy's perimeter. She made it to the nearby forest before the alarm was raised, giving her a precious head start. But what she hadn't counted on was the severity of the response. Because classified files were involved, the incident was escalated to the highest levels of military command. Within hours, the search had expanded from local security to a full-scale military operation involving multiple branches of the armed forces. As Rebecca moved through the dense woodland, she could hear the helicopters overhead and the distant sound of search teams. She knew these forests from childhood camping trips with her father, and she used every skill he had taught her to stay hidden. She moved parallel to the main roads, staying just inside the tree line, making her way toward the nearest military base where she hoped to find someone who would listen to her story. The evidence she carried felt heavier with each step, not because of its physical weight, but because of the responsibility it represented. The situation took a dramatic turn when military intelligence suggested that the stolen files might contain information about flight patterns and defense systems. The possibility of enemy involvement couldn't be ruled out, and suddenly Rebecca wasn't just a runaway student. She was a potential national security threat. The decision was made to deploy fighter jets to assist in the search. Their thermal imaging and high-speed capabilities making them ideal for tracking a single individual across vast terrain. Rebecca had no idea that she was about to become the target of the most sophisticated military hardware in the world. The F-16 Fighting Falcons took off from Langley Air Force Base in perfect formation, their pilots briefed on the situation and authorized to use necessary force to prevent the compromise of national security. Among them was Captain Michael Torres, a decorated pilot with over 1,000 flight hours and a reputation for precision under pressure. Like his fellow pilots, he had been told they were pursuing a dangerous individual who had stolen classified information. The possibility that their target might be innocent never crossed their minds as they streaked across the morning sky. Rebecca first heard the jets when she was crossing a small clearing, the distinctive roar of their engines cutting through the forest sounds like a knife. She looked up to see the sleek aircraft circling overhead, their movements coordinated and purposeful. The reality of her situation hit her like a physical blow. She wasn't just running from Academy security anymore. She was being hunted by the full might of the United States military. The forests that had seemed like refuge now felt like a trap, and she realized that her childhood games of hide-and-seek had become a deadly serious game of survival. The pilots maintained radio contact as they conducted their search, their thermal imaging revealing heat signatures throughout the forest. Captain Torres was the first to spot a human figure moving through the trees, a lone individual who matched the description they had been given. "Contact," he reported tersely. "I have visual on the target." The figure below was clearly trying to evade detection, moving from tree to tree with practiced skill. But there was nowhere to hide from the sophisticated sensors of the F-16s. As the jets descended for a closer look, Rebecca knew she had been spotted. The sound of the approaching aircraft was deafening, and she could feel the downdraft from their engines as they passed overhead. In desperation, she broke from the tree line and began running across an open field, her academy training forgotten in the face of pure survival instinct. Behind her, she could hear the jets circling back, their engines growing louder with each pass. She knew that if they decided she was a threat, she would have no chance of escape. Captain Torres armed his weapon systems as he prepared for another pass. His orders were clear: prevent the compromise of classified information at all costs. The figure below was clearly attempting to evade capture, behavior consistent with someone who had something to hide. But as he descended for a closer look, something caught his eye that made him hesitate. The person below was wearing what appeared to be a uniform, and on that uniform was a distinctive crest that he recognized from his own past. The Whitfield Academy crest was unmistakable to anyone who had ever worn it. Captain Torres had graduated from the academy 15 years earlier, and the sight of that emblem brought back a flood of memories. He remembered the pride of earning the right to wear it, the honor code that every student swore to uphold, and the motto that had guided him through his military career. Strength through unity had been more than just words. It had been a way of life that had shaped him into the man he had become. "Hold your fire," Torres commanded over the radio, his voice cutting through the static. "I repeat, hold your fire." The other pilots acknowledged his order, confused but trusting their flight leader's judgment. Torres brought his aircraft down to a dangerously low altitude, close enough to see the details of the uniform below. There was no mistaking it now. The person they were pursuing was wearing the same crest he had worn with pride during his own academy years. Rebecca looked up as the lead F-16 passed directly overhead, so close she could see the pilot's helmet through the canopy. For a moment, their eyes seemed to meet across the impossible distance, and she raised her hand in a gesture that was part surrender, part plea for understanding. She pulled open her jacket to display her academy crest more clearly, hopping against hope that someone would recognize what it meant. The jets continued circling, but something had changed in their behavior. They seemed less aggressive, more cautious, as if the pilots were reassessing the situation. Captain Torres requested permission to establish radio contact with the figure below. His commanding officer granted the request, though not without questions about the sudden change in tactics. Torres switched to an emergency frequency and broadcast a message that he hoped would reach the person on the ground. "This is Captain Torres of the United States Air Force. You are surrounded and have nowhere to run. I can see your academy crest. If you are indeed a Whitfield student, you know the honor code. Surrender now, and I give you my word that you will be treated fairly." The radio crackled to life with Rebecca's voice, breathless but determined. "Captain, my name is Rebecca Martinez. I'm a senior at Whitfield Academy, and I have evidence of corruption and abuse of power by Commander Hawthorne. I didn't steal any classified files. I was framed because I was about to expose her crimes. I'm not a threat to national security. I'm trying to protect it by bringing this evidence to the proper authorities." Her words carried the ring of truth, and Torres found himself believing her despite the circumstances. "Miss Martinez," Torres replied, "you need to understand that you are in serious danger. There are forces at work here that are beyond your control. If what you're saying is true, then you've stumbled into something much bigger than academy politics. But running isn't going to solve anything. You need to trust the system to work, even when it seems like it's failing you." His words were gentle but firm, carrying the weight of experience and the wisdom of someone who had learned to navigate the complex world of military hierarchy. Rebecca's response was immediate and passionate. "Captain, I tried to trust the system. I followed every protocol, documented every abuse, and tried to work within the proper channels. But Hawthorne has allies who are willing to cover for her, and I was about to become the scapegoat for her crimes. I couldn't let that happen, not just for my sake, but for every student who will come after me. Someone has to speak up, even if it means risking everything." Her voice broke slightly as she spoke, the strain of the past weeks evident in every word. Torres found himself at a crossroads. His orders were clear, but his conscience was telling him something different. The honor code he had learned at Whitfield Academy was sacred to him, and one of its fundamental principles was protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. If Rebecca Martinez was telling the truth, then she represented everything the Academy stood for, while her pursuers represented everything it stood against. The decision he made in the next few moments would define not just his career, but his character as a man and as an officer. "Martinez," he said finally, "I'm going to do something that could end my career, but I believe you're telling the truth. I'm going to escort you to safety, but you need to trust me completely. Follow my instructions exactly, and don't deviate from the plan I'm about to give you. We're going to get you to someone who can help, but it's going to require courage and faith in the system that has failed you so far." His voice carried a determination that gave Rebecca hope for the first time in weeks. The plan Torres outlined was audacious and dangerous. He would use his authority as flight leader to redirect the search while secretly guiding Rebecca to a safe location where she could present her evidence to the proper authorities. It would require precise timing and absolute trust between two people who had never met but were bound together by a shared code of honor. The other pilots would have to be convinced that the search was continuing in a different direction, buying precious time for Rebecca to reach safety. As the F-16s disappeared into the distance, Rebecca felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. She had been given a chance, but she knew that the real battle was just beginning. The evidence she carried could expose corruption at the highest levels of the Academy, but it could also destroy the careers of innocent people who had been manipulated by Hawthorne's schemes. The weight of responsibility was enormous, but she knew that she had to see it through to the end. Captain Torres contacted his base commander with a carefully crafted report. He explained that the search had been unsuccessful in the immediate area, and requested permission to expand the search pattern to include neighboring counties. The request was granted, giving him the cover he needed to begin the most important mission of his career. He wasn't just protecting a fellow Academy graduate. He was protecting the principles that had guided his entire life. Rebecca made her way to the designated coordinates, a small civilian airfield where tours had arranged for her to meet with General Patricia Williamson, a respected officer who had the authority and integrity to ensure that the evidence would be properly investigated. The general had been Tor's mentor during his early career, and he knew that she would handle the situation with the fairness and thoroughness it deserved. It was a risk for both of them, but it was the right thing to do. The meeting with General Williamson was everything Rebecca had hoped for and more. The general listened to her story with the patience and attention it deserved, examining the evidence with the eye of someone who understood the complexities of military justice. When Rebecca finished her presentation, the general sat back in her chair and studied the young woman before her with obvious respect. "Miss Martinez," she said finally, "what you've done here takes tremendous courage. Not many people would risk everything to expose corruption, especially when the odds are stacked against them." The investigation that followed was swift and thorough. Within days, Commander Hawthorne was relieved of her duties and placed under arrest. The evidence Rebecca had gathered painted a picture of systematic abuse of power, financial improprieties, and a pattern of behavior that violated every principle the Academy stood for. Other students came forward with their own stories of harassment and intimidation, creating a comprehensive case that left no doubt about Hawthorne's guilt. Rebecca's vindication was complete, but the victory came at a cost. The scandal rocked Whitfield Academy to its core, and the institution had to work hard to rebuild its reputation. Rebecca herself became something of a celebrity, praised by some as a hero and criticized by others as a troublemaker who had damaged the Academy's standing. She handled both the praise and the criticism with the same grace and dignity that had characterized her throughout the ordeal. Captain Torres faced his own consequences for his role in helping Rebecca. His superiors were not pleased that he had deviated from orders, even for what turned out to be the right reasons. However, the ultimate vindication of Rebecca's story and the exposure of real corruption helped to mitigate the potential damage to his career. He was officially reprimanded, but privately commended for his judgment and integrity. The incident became a case study in military academies about the importance of moral courage and the difficulty of doing the right thing when it conflicts with orders. The relationship between Rebecca and Torres continued long after the immediate crisis had passed. He became a mentor to her, helping her navigate the complexities of military life and preparing her for her own career as an officer. Their bond, forged in the crucible of crisis, represented the best of what the military could be when honor and integrity trumped politics and convenience. The Whitfield Academy crest that had saved Rebecca's life became a symbol of the values that both of them would carry forward in their service to their country. Years later, when Rebecca had become a distinguished officer in her own right, she would often reflect on that day when F-16s had surged toward her with deadly intent. The pilot who had spotted her academy crest and chosen to trust rather than destroy had changed the course of her life and demonstrated that the principles they had both learned at Whitfield Academy were more than just words on a banner. They were a way of life that could overcome even the most desperate circumstances. The story of Rebecca Martinez and Captain Torres became legend at Whitfield Academy, a reminder to future generations of students that courage and integrity were not just abstract concepts, but practical tools for navigating the complex challenges of military life. The Academy implemented new policies to prevent the kind of abuse that had nearly destroyed Rebecca's future, and the Martinez Protocols became standard procedure for handling complaints against Academy leadership. The crest that had once seemed like just another uniform requirement had proven to be a lifeline, a symbol of values that transcended individual ambition and connected all who wore it in a bond of mutual respect and protection. The final chapter of the story came when Rebecca returned to Whitfield Academy as an instructor, her career having taken her around the world and through challenges that would have broken lesser individuals. Standing before a new class of cadets, she told them the story of her encounter with the F-16s, emphasizing not the drama of the moment, but the importance of the principles that had guided both her and Captain Torres through their darkest hours. The Academy crest on her uniform had taken on new meaning, representing not just her alma mater but the values that had literally saved her life and defined her character as an officer and as a human being.